I spent 14 years building my family's business from nothing. My parents handed 70% of it to my younger brother the week he got out of prison. 14 years of my life turned that struggling hardware store into a company worth $2.3 million. Then my parents gave most of it away to the son who was never there. My name is Nathan Briggs. I'm 42 years old. 14 years ago, I saved my family's business. It was a hardware store. One location. $30,000 in debt. 90 days from shutting its doors forever. My father built it from scratch in 1986. 32 years of his life. His name above the door. His reputation in the neighborhood. The people he knew by their first names and their kids' names and what they were building on the weekends. Everything he had worked for, and it was dying. So I stepped in. No salary for the first 2 years. I used my own savings. I restructured every supplier contract. I modernized the inventory system. I built a contractor program that turned our revenue around inside of 18 months. And over the next 14 years, I expanded that single struggling store into a regional operation with 3 locations, a team of over 30 employees, and a fleet of 6 commercial vehicles. A business now valued at $2.3 million by an independent commercial assessor. And then my parents called a family meeting. My younger brother Derek had just gotten out of his second stint in county jail. And my parents announced they were restructuring the business. Derek would receive 70% ownership. I would keep 30%. Because, my mother said, looking me directly in the eye, he needs this more than you do. You've always been fine on your own. I sat at that kitchen table, the same table where my father once told me the store was mine to save or let die, and I listened to my parents give away the thing I had spent 14 years building. To a man who had never worked a single day in it. Then I stood up, walked out of that house, and called a lawyer. This is that story. My father, Raymond Briggs, opened Briggs Hardware in Columbus, Ohio, in 1986. He was 31 years old. He had a pickup truck, a rented storefront on the east side, and a box of business cards he'd printed at the copy shop. Dad was a tradesman at heart. He knew tools. He knew materials. He knew how to talk to contractors and plumbers and weekend carpenters who just needed someone to point them toward the right gauge screw. He had a reputation for honesty and a handshake that meant something. The store had a regulars culture. The same people coming in on the same Saturday mornings, the kind of relationship between a small business and its neighborhood that cannot be manufactured or advertised into existence. My father had built that over years. It was real and it was valuable, and it was the foundation I stood on when I started rebuilding everything else. I want to give him that credit. What I rebuilt on top of something he made. The community trust was his before it was mine. I fought to keep it when everything else was failing. That matters. The first decade, he did fine. Not spectacular, but steady. Enough to raise 2 boys, pay a mortgage, take 1 vacation a year to Lake Erie. Enough. My mother Carol worked the register most afternoons after her shift at the school district office. That was just how it was. Briggs Hardware was a family operation in the literal sense. It ran on family labor and family loyalty and the kind of goodwill you build over years of knowing your customers by name. Then the big box stores came. I was in college at Ohio State when the first one opened 6 miles from my dad's store. Dad called me that weekend, not to complain. He wasn't a complaining man, but I could hear it in his voice. That particular quietness that means someone is doing math in their head and not liking the numbers. Over the next several years, 2 more big box competitors opened within a 10-mile radius. Dad tried to adapt. He cut prices where he could. He ran specials. He stayed open late. He was there 6 days a week, sometimes 7, and he still knew every customer's name. But by the time I graduated and was working my first real job, project management for a commercial contractor, the store was in trouble. Real trouble. The year I turned 28, my father sat me down and told me the truth. The debt was $30,000. Vendors were threatening to pull their accounts. The landlord had given him 90 days to catch up on back rent or renegotiate the lease. I don't know what to do, my father said. I had never heard him say that before. Not once in my entire life. There are moments that define you. Not the dramatic ones, not the ones you see coming. The quiet ones at kitchen tables, where someone you love tells you they are out of road and you have to decide, right then, what kind of person you are. I am a practical person. I had been thinking about the store's situation for months before that conversation, watching the numbers from the outside, noticing the things that were going wrong, wondering whether my father saw what I was seeing. I think I already knew, somewhere under the ordinary surface of family dinners and phone calls, that a conversation was coming. I had just been waiting for him to start it. When he finally did, I realized I had already made my decision. I had made it without knowing it, somewhere during one of those months of watching. The conversation was not a decision point. It was just the confirmation of something I had already settled. I asked him to give me a week to look at the books. He slid them across the table without a word. I took them home. I laid everything out on my kitchen table: ledger books, vendor invoices, the lease agreement, the line of credit documents, 3 years of tax returns. I built a spreadsheet that covered the whole picture: what was owed, what was coming in, what the fixed costs were, where the hemorrhaging was worst. The hemorrhaging was worst in inventory. My father was carrying too much of the wrong stock, specialty items that moved slowly while basic high-demand materials were perpetually backordered. He had good instincts for people, but his inventory management was still running on the system he had built in the early 90s, which in the age of big-box competitors and online pricing was essentially running blind. I called a friend from college named Marcus who had gone into retail operations management. We talked for 2 hours on a Saturday night. He walked me through what a turnaround typically required, what the first priorities should be, what the common failure points were. He was generous with his time and honest about the odds. The odds were not great, but they were not impossible. A week later, I went back to my father. "I can fix this," I said, "but I need to run it, and it's going to take time." "What about your job?" "I'll give notice Monday." He started to argue that I had my own life, my own career, that this wasn't my problem to solve. I let him get through about 2 sentences of it. "Let me do this," I said. "This is your life's work. I'm not going to watch it disappear." He looked at me for a long time. My father is not a man who cries easily. He didn't cry then, but there was something in his face that I had never seen there before, a kind of relief mixed with something that might have been gratitude or might have been grief. I couldn't fully tell. Then he nodded. And that was that. I gave notice at my job the following Monday. My manager told me I was making a mistake. I told him I appreciated that, and that I was doing it anyway. I had about $40,000 in personal savings at that point, money I had been setting aside for a down payment on a house. I put $25,000 of it directly into the business within the first 60 days to stabilize the immediate debt and satisfy the 2 vendors who were closest to pulling their accounts entirely. The remaining $15,000 was my emergency fund. I tried not to think too hard about what an emergency would look like with $15,000 standing between me and it. I did not take a salary for the first 23 months. Not a dime. I covered my rent and utilities and groceries from what remained of my savings, then from a small personal line of credit when the savings ran out, stretching everything as far as it would go. I drove a 12-year-old Civic with 200,000 miles on it. I cooked at home almost every night. The last vacation I took before stepping into the store was a long weekend in Michigan with a woman I had been dating. That relationship did not survive the first year of the turnaround. I didn't have time for it, and I didn't have the emotional bandwidth even when I technically had the time. That's something nobody talks about when they describe someone saving a family business. The personal things that don't make it through. Meanwhile, I was rebuilding the store from the inside out. The first thing I did was renegotiate every supplier contract. I spent 6 weeks on the phone calling every vendor, explaining the situation plainly and without embarrassment, and asking what they could offer: extended payment terms, temporary price relief, anything. Some said no. A meaningful number said yes, or said yes to partial accommodations. The ones who worked with me bought us the time we needed. The second thing I did was build the contractor program. The big box stores had us beaten on consumer price. A corporation buying at their volume would always win that fight. I accepted that reality inside of the first month and stopped pretending otherwise. What the big box stores could not reliably do was serve the professional trade. Their staff turnover was high, their specialized inventory was inconsistent, and their attitude toward contractors, who needed delivery, credit terms, and someone who actually knew what a commercial-grade ball valve was, ranged from indifferent to hostile. I went to every licensed contractor, plumber, electrician, and residential builder within a 20-mile radius. In person, when I could. On the phone when I couldn't. I offered net 30 billing terms, job site delivery within the service zone, dedicated account contacts, which for the first year meant me personally, every single call, and a specialized professional inventory I curated specifically for the trade accounts we were building. It was not glamorous work. It was a lot of driving and a lot of phone calls and a lot of showing up with coffee at job sites at 7 in the morning so I could talk to a foreman for 15 minutes before his crew arrived. It was learning the names of people's kids and remembering them. It was calling someone back within the hour every time, because that's what it means to be the option that a big corporation can't be. Within 18 months, we had 42 active contractor accounts. Revenue was up 41% over the prior year. We were not just surviving. We were pulling away. By the time I was 31, I had paid my father back his equity stake in full, cleared the business debt, and started paying myself a modest salary. Not what I could have earned elsewhere, but enough. By 33, I had hired a full-time store manager and a staff of 9. By 35, we opened the second location in Westerville. The Westerville opening was the moment I understood that what we had built was real and had staying power. I remember standing in the empty storefront the week before we opened, looking at the shelving units we'd spent 3 days installing, and feeling something I hadn't let myself feel during the hard years: pride. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind, the kind that lives in your chest and doesn't need anyone else to confirm it. My father came to the opening day. He walked around the store slowly, looking at everything, not saying much. Near the end of the morning, he found me by the service counter and shook my hand. Just a handshake. From my father, that was a paragraph. By 38, we opened the third location in Dublin. By last year, the business my father built and I rebuilt was valued at $2.3 million by an independent commercial assessor. 14 years of my life. Every major decision, every expansion, every risk, every hiring call, and every firing I had to make, because that is also part of running a business. The hard conversations, the days when you have to look at someone who showed up and worked and tell them it isn't working out, and then carry that home with you. Every Saturday I worked. Every Christmas Eve I spent managing a delivery schedule, because the holidays are the worst time for a hardware operation and the best time for a leak or a broken furnace, and our contractor clients knew we'd answer the phone. Mine. Not legally mine in a clean, documented sense. That is the complicated part one will get to, but mine in the way that anything is yours when you have poured yourself into it completely, and it would not exist without you. When I drove between the 3 locations, which I did on a rotating schedule, I knew every employee by name and most of their family situations. I knew which suppliers were reliable in a pinch and which ones needed to be followed up on. I knew the quirks of each building. The Dublin location had a loading dock that needed to be leveled in winter. The Westerville store had a lighting issue in the back warehouse that I had been fighting with the landlord about for 2 years. That is what 14 years looks like from the inside. Not a highlight reel. 1,000 small things, accumulated, that add up to something real. Now let me tell you about Derek. Derek is 4 years younger than me. He was 24 when I stepped in to save the store. He is 38 now. I want to be fair. I want to be honest. And being honest means not pretending Derek is a monster, because he isn't. He's my brother. I grew up with him. I know who he is at his best. Funny, charming, genuinely capable of warmth. The kind of person who can walk into a room of strangers and make everyone comfortable within 10 minutes. When we were kids, Derek was the one everyone wanted at the party. He had an energy that was hard to define, but easy to feel. When we were teenagers, he could disarm our parents out of any punishment with about 45 seconds of earnest conversation. I watched him do it so many times I eventually stopped being annoyed by it and started being a little impressed. That quality, the ability to make people feel good about forgiving him, has been both his most useful trait and the thing that has made consequences harder to stick. I also know who he is the rest of the time. Derek has never held a job longer than 14 months. Not once in his adult life. He moves toward things enthusiastically and with real momentum. And then, when the novelty fades and the work becomes routine, the momentum stops. It is not malice. I do not believe Derek wakes up intending to fail at things. I think he experiences life in a way where the beginning of things feels like everything and the middle of things feels like nothing, and he has never found a way to bridge that gap. He borrowed money from our parents on at least a dozen occasions that I am aware of. Several $1,000s here, a couple thousand there. The amounts were never large enough to be dramatic and never small enough to be trivial. They were the size of amounts that families absorb quietly and don't discuss after the initial awkward period passes. He was arrested for the first time when he was 29. A bar altercation that escalated badly. He spent 60 days in county. He came out seeming genuinely shaken, found a job at a logistics company, worked there for almost a year, and I think we all thought, that maybe this was the thing that had finally changed the equation for him. Then the job ended, the money got short again, he borrowed again, disappeared into a relationship in Cincinnati for about 2 years, resurfaced, seemed okay, wasn't okay, then was okay again in the cycle that had become familiar. The second arrest happened when he was 36. Theft-related charges. He spent 8 months in county this time. My parents drove 3 hours each way every visitation day they were allowed. They did this without complaint, because that is who they are, and because Derek is their son. During all of those 14 years, the whole run of it, Derek was not involved in the business. Not one day of work. Not $1 invested. Not 1 hour of helping out during a busy season or covering a shift or doing any of the 100 informal things that people do when they are part of a family operation. I never asked him to be involved. I want to be honest about that. In the early years, when we were scrambling to stabilize the store, I didn't reach out to Derek because I didn't think he was in a position to be relied on, and I couldn't afford the risk of something falling through. As the years went on and the pattern became clearer, the question stopped presenting itself. My parents never pushed it either. We all understood, without putting it into words, what Derek's involvement would and wouldn't look like. That understanding, that silent, mutual acknowledgement of reality, is part of what made the family meeting so hard to process. Because it meant they knew. They knew what I had done, and they knew what Derek hadn't done. They made their decision with full knowledge of both. Derek got out of county in late summer. My parents had been talking about retirement, about what would happen to the business, about the future. These were conversations I expected and was prepared to have. My expectation was that I would be compensated, bought out at fair market value, or given formal full ownership with my parents receiving an equity payout over time, or some structured arrangement that reflected the arithmetic of what I had actually put in. $25,000 of personal capital, 23 months of unpaid labor, 14 years of management, expansion, and value creation. Those things have a specific dollar value, and I had a clear sense of what that number was. The family meeting was called for a Sunday in September. My parents' house. Dinner first, then the announcement. I drove over in the early afternoon. That specific Columbus autumn quality where it's still warm in the sun, but you can feel the cold underneath it. I parked in the driveway and went inside. The dinner was unusually quiet. My mother had made pot roast, which she makes for occasions. My father talked about the store, routine business things, the kind of conversation I could have in my sleep. The Dublin contractor deal, the copper fitting prices going up. Normal. Derek was at the table. He had been out about 3 weeks by then. He seemed calmer than I expected. He ate, talked about things that were adjacent to having plans, nodded when my parents spoke. He looked at me periodically with an expression I couldn't fully read. I understand now that he knew what was coming. He had to have known. My mother cleared the plates and brought coffee. Then my father reached for a folder on the counter. I had noticed it there when I came in, but hadn't thought much of it, and set it on the table. He was careful with his words. Practiced. He had clearly been through what he was going to say multiple times before this moment. The business was going to be restructured, he said. Ownership formalized now, before his eventual retirement, to avoid complications later. Nathan, 30%. Derek, 70%. The reasoning he offered, Derek needed a foundation, something to build toward, a real stake in something that would require him to show up. The family business was the right vehicle for that. As for me, I had proven I could manage without support. I had always landed on my feet. My role running operations was secure. He pushed the folder toward me. I didn't open it yet. My mother spoke then. She said it gently. in the voice she uses when she wants something to land softly. You've always been fine on your own, Nathan. Derek needs this more than you do. I sat with that sentence. You've always been fine on your own. I thought about the 23 months I worked without pay, the $25,000 from my personal savings, the relationship that didn't survive the first year of the turnaround, my father's handshake at the Westerville opening, Earl at the Dublin store 2 weeks earlier. You run a good operation. And I thought about the folder sitting in front of me that made a legal argument that all of that had been worth 30%. As if my competence was the reason I deserved less. As if Derek's 14 years of absence was the reason he deserved more. I asked one question. Has a lawyer looked at this? My father said yes. I asked if I could see the documents. He pushed the folder the rest of the way toward me. I read everything. Slowly, completely. Right there at the kitchen table, while my mother stood at the sink and Derek looked at his phone, and my father watched me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before, something between resignation and the discomfort of a man who knows he is doing something that cannot be undone. I finished reading. I closed the folder. I set it back on the table. I stood up, got my jacket from the hook by the door, the same hook where I had hung my backpack every day after school for years, and I said, calmly and clearly, that I would be consulting my own attorney and that they would hear from me. Then I walked out. I sat in my car in their driveway for 4 minutes. I watched the clock on my dashboard without really seeing it, the way you watch something when your brain is processing what hasn't fully arrived yet. Then I drove home, and the next morning I called a business litigation attorney. I want to be honest about the legal situation because it is complicated. The business restructuring my parents proposed is not a simple thing to challenge. My father is the original owner. The store was always legally his. When I stepped in 14 years ago, we did not formalize anything in writing. I had no ownership agreement, no promissory note for the $25,000 I invested, no contract for the 2 years I worked without salary. We were a family. We didn't do paperwork. That was a mistake, and it was mine as much as anyone's. What I do have is 14 years of financial records showing the business's trajectory under my management, payroll records showing myself as operator, tax filings listing me as managing partner for the last 11 years, supplier contracts in my name, the commercial assessor's report, email correspondence in which my father explicitly discussed the business as something I was building for both of us. My attorney says I have a legitimate claim, not to the full ownership, but to equitable compensation for my labor, my investment, and the increase in value I directly produced. That case is in process. It will take time. I do not know how it will end. What I know is that I will not sign the restructuring agreement as written. My parents have not taken this well. My mother calls periodically. The calls have a particular shape. They begin with how much she misses me and end with some version of the suggestion that I am being stubborn, that Derek has already been through so much, that family has to come first, that I should be the bigger man. I have been the bigger man for 14 years. The bigger man was the one who worked for free for almost 2 years. The bigger man was the one who didn't take a vacation for 4 years running. The bigger man was the one who answered his father's phone at 7 in the morning on a Saturday when a pipe burst at the Dublin location and handled it before breakfast, and who then went to the store after dealing with the plumber and ran a full day's operations because that is what the situation required. The bigger man, in this family, has always been defined as the person who absorbs the consequences of other people's choices without complaint. The person who makes it possible for other people to fail safely. Being that person, I have discovered, is a role that benefits everyone except the man playing it. My father has not called. I don't know if that means he agrees with what they did, or simply doesn't know how to face me, or is waiting for me to make the first move. My father is not a man who revisits his decisions once he has made them. It is the same quality that helped him open a hardware store with nothing but a pickup truck and a rented storefront. It is also the quality that put a restructuring agreement in front of me at a kitchen table and expected me to sign it. Derek called once, about 2 weeks after the meeting. The call was brief. He said he hadn't known how things were going to go that evening, which I do not fully believe, and he said he hoped things could get worked out. His voice had the quality it gets when he is being sincere about something he also knows he cannot fix. I recognized it. I've known that voice my whole life. I told him I needed time and ended the call. He hasn't called again. I think Derek is self-aware enough, in his way, to know that there is no version of a conversation between us right now that doesn't make things worse. I have not been to my parents' house in 8 months. My parents have not come to my apartment in 8 months. For the record, I live 15 minutes away. I have thought about this distance more than I expected to. It is one thing to decide you are done with a situation. It is another thing to live with the texture of that decision. To drive past a diner your family used to go to on Sunday mornings and feel the weight of what is absent. To realize you have been calling your mother every few days for your entire adult life, and now you are not. To notice the silence where something used to be. I am not, for the record, at peace. I want to be accurate about that. I am not spending my days in quiet resolution. I am spending my days running a business, which I continue to do, because the business needs to run and the employees need their paychecks and the contractor accounts need their orders fulfilled, while also managing the emotional weight of a family estrangement and an active legal proceeding. It is a lot. I won't pretend otherwise. But I also do not regret the decision to fight. That part one I'm certain about. I want to tell you about something that happened 2 weeks before the family meeting, because it has been on my mind ever since. I was at the Dublin store doing an inventory review. It was a Tuesday afternoon, slow traffic, the kind of quiet that only exists in retail when the foot traffic drops, and you can actually hear the building settle. One of my longest tenured employees, a man named Earl who has worked for us since the Westerville opening, stopped me in the aisle near the fasteners section. "Hey, Nate," he said, "just want you to know, working here's been good for me. You run a good operation." I thanked him. We talked for a few minutes about his daughter's college visit that weekend. He was excited about it. She was looking at schools in Cincinnati and Columbus. It was an ordinary moment, the kind of moment that is invisible inside a normal week. 2 weeks later, the store Earl was standing in, the store I had built the operational systems for, hired the staff for, negotiated the lease for, opened for business, was technically owned 70% by a man who had never once walked through its door. Earl doesn't know that yet. The other 12 people on payroll at that location don't know that yet. The 42 contractor accounts, the plumbers and electricians and builders who call me personally when they have a problem, because over 14 years I have made myself the kind of operator people can call personally, don't know that yet. I think about what it will mean when they find out. I think about what it will mean for the relationships I have built, the accounts I have developed, the trust that is the actual foundation of a business like ours. Trust is not transferable. You cannot hand someone a 70% stake in a business and transfer the trust that makes the business work. That trust lives in the interactions, in the history, in the years of showing up. Derek has never shown up. Not once. I don't know what happens to a business when the person who built its relationships is no longer in control of it. I have some theories, and none of them are optimistic. That is also something I think about. People ask me if I'm angry. Yes, obviously. I would be lying if I said otherwise. But the anger is not simple. It is not the clean, hot anger of someone who was robbed by a stranger. It is the complicated, cold anger of someone who was dismissed by people who know him completely. People who know exactly what he did, exactly what it cost him, exactly what it was worth, and decided it counted for less than they originally implied. That is a different kind of wound. My mother said I've always been fine on my own. She meant it as reassurance, I think, maybe even as a compliment. But what it actually communicated was, your capability has been noted and discounted. The fact that you don't need to be rescued means you don't qualify for the same consideration as someone who does. This is a logic I have encountered in small ways my entire life. The reliable child gets less attention than the difficult one. The child who doesn't need intervention doesn't get it, even when they should. The one who shows up doesn't get thanked. They just get more things asked of them, because they have proven they can handle it. I was that child. I was that son. And for most of my life, I told myself it was fine. That reliability had its own rewards. That doing the right thing was its own outcome. That the respect and recognition would come eventually, even if it came quietly, even if nobody made a speech about it. I think a lot of people who are the reliable one in their family tell themselves some version of this story. It is how you sustain years of being the one who holds things together. You have to believe the effort is being registered somewhere. that the people who matter to you are keeping some kind of internal account, that one day the balance will settle in a way that makes the years make sense. That belief is the thing my parents dismantled in a single Sunday evening. Not because they don't love me. They do. But because they chose, in the moment when it counted, to let Derek's need outweigh my contribution. They looked at the math, 14 years on one side, nothing on the other, and decided the math didn't matter as much as the need. I believed that. I genuinely did. And then I sat at a kitchen table and watched my father put a folder in front of me that made it mathematically clear what my reliability had been worth to them. 30%. 14 years of my life, and they handed me 30% of what I built. Here is what I want people to understand. This is not about greed. I want to be clear about that, because I know how these stories can sound when someone is in litigation with their own family over a business. It can sound like a person who is in love with money and using moral language to dress it up. I have a salary. I have savings. Not what I might have had if I hadn't put $25,000 into this business 14 years ago and deferred my earning potential for years, but enough. I will be financially okay no matter how the litigation ends. What I will not be okay with is the version of this story where I spend 14 years building something and end up with 30% because my parents decided my competence was a reason to give me less. This is about what it means to be recognized. Not celebrated, not thanked with speeches, just recognized, in the most basic, functional sense of the word, as someone whose contribution meant something, whose labor mattered, whose sacrifice was real. My father said once, maybe 6 or 7 years in, when I was exhausted from a stretch of 60-hour weeks and questioning whether the next expansion was the right move or just ego. He came by the Dublin site on a Sunday morning, when it was still a gutted storefront we were preparing, and he walked around it slowly, the way he walks through the stores when he's taking stock. And then he stopped and said, "What we're building here is real, Nathan. Something real, something that lasts, something the family can stand on." Something the family can stand on. I held on to that. I worked inside of it for the better part of a decade. And when the moment came to define what that phrase actually meant, who had built the foundation and who had the right to stand on it, my father answered the question in a way I had not expected and cannot fully accept. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I should have gotten everything in writing from the beginning. My attorney has certainly made that clear, with the measured, restrained patience of someone who has seen this exact situation more than once. But I trusted my family, and that trust was the thing that made 14 years feel possible. It was also the thing they leveraged. I do not hate my parents. I want to say that plainly, because I think some people expect that I should. I love my parents. My father is, in most respects, a good man. My mother is a kind woman. They love both of their sons. That is not in question. But love without fairness is just sentiment. And sentiment, it turns out, is not something you can deposit in a bank or show to a judge. I do not know what comes next with my family. The litigation will play out however it plays out. Maybe we settle. Maybe it goes to a longer proceeding. Maybe it resolves into something that at least acknowledges the basic arithmetic of what I put in and what I am owed. What I have had to make peace with is the uncertainty. I am a person who is very uncomfortable with uncertainty. I run operations. I make plans. I build things systematically, step by step, because step by step is how things actually get built. Sitting inside a legal process where the timeline is measured in months and the outcome is genuinely not guaranteed runs against everything that is natural to me. But this is where I am, and I am not walking away from it. And maybe, somewhere on the other side of all of this, there is a version of a relationship with my parents that can survive what happened. I do not know if it is possible. I do not know if it is something I want. I do not know if what would be left on the other side of forgiveness would be anything recognizable as the relationship I believed I had, the one where a handshake meant something and building something together meant you both owned it. I'm not holding my breath. But I'm not closing the door either. Because I have spent my entire adult life building things. It is what I know how to do. You clear the debt. You restructure the contracts. You open the books. You make the difficult calls. You do the work that needs doing, even when it costs you, even when no one thanks you for it. And you do not abandon something real just because it got hard. That is who I am. It is who I was when I was 28 and my father slid a ledger full of bad news across a kitchen table, and I said, Give me a week to look at this. And it is who I am now, 42 years old, sitting with an attorney and a 14-year paper trail and a decision to fight for what I built. I built something. It is real, and I am not done fighting for it. People ask if I regret stepping in all those years ago. If I regret choosing the store over my own plans, the house I didn't buy, the salary I deferred, the relationship that didn't survive the first year, the years I poured into something that turned out not to be legally secured. I think about that question carefully every time someone asks it. And the honest answer is, I don't regret the work. I don't regret saving my father's store. I don't regret the years I spent building it into something worth saving, into something that employs people and serves a community and has Earl's daughter thinking about college because the paycheck showed up reliably every 2 weeks. The work was worth doing. I believe that completely. What I regret is assuming that people who loved me would treat my sacrifice as something sacred, that they would see what I had given up and count it, that when the time came to make things right, they would make them right. That is the assumption that cost me. It is also, I suspect, the assumption that costs a lot of people who are the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who holds things together. We operate on faith that the investment will be acknowledged. We do not put it in writing because it feels like a betrayal of the trust that makes the investment possible. And then we find out what happens when the other party does not share our understanding of the deal. But I learned something in the last 8 months that I think I needed to learn. You cannot build something real on a foundation of unspoken understandings. Love is not a contract. Family is not a guarantee. And the people who benefit most from your reliability are not always the people most likely to protect it when it counts. Get things in writing, even with people you love, especially with people you love, not because you don't trust them, because trust is not an enforceable legal instrument. And if the day comes when someone's trust turns out to have limits, you need more than your word against theirs. I needed to learn that lesson. I learned it the expensive way. 14 years, 3 locations, $2.3 million. Built by one son. Given away, most of it, in a single Sunday evening meeting, over a pot roast, at a kitchen table I have sat at since I was 4 years old. If you believe that what you build should belong to you, that competence shouldn't be punished, that sacrifice should count for something, that he needs it more, is not a reason to take what someone else earned, then you already understand why I walked out of that house. And if you've ever been the reliable one, the one who shows up, the one who holds things together while everyone else falls apart, the one who gets told, when it matters most, that your dependability is exactly why you deserve less, then you know exactly how I felt sitting in that driveway for 4 minutes, watching the clock, deciding what came next. And you know that the decision I made was not about revenge or bitterness or stubbornness. It was about the simple, non-negotiable idea that what you build with your hands and your years and your sacrifice is yours. Not because the law always agrees, but because it is true. Hit that like button. Subscribe. Because showing up matters. Sacrifice matters. And what you build with your own hands belongs to you. #IBuildIt, they gave it away.